In the early 1980s, the American motorcycle industry was 18 months from total annihilation. The bikes were falling apart, the market was gone. The two names that built this country's moto culture were either dying or already dead. Today, broader U.S. vehicle manufacturing employment has climbed back toward 1 million jobs. Brands like Harley, Indian, and Buell are dominating their most profitable segments. And one brand's sales just tanked 23%, but they're still winning big. This is the $81.5 million gamble, the ruthless engineering wars, and the brutal truth about how America's two-wheeled icons clawed their way back from the grave. The Golden Age collapse. Rewind to the early 1970s. Harley-Davidson ruled the heavyweight market. Motorcycles over 1,000 cubic centimeters, with a near-total grip on American sales. Their V-twin engines thundered across America's highways. Indian Motorcycle, founded in 1901, 2 full years before Harley even sparked to life, had already etched its name as the pioneer. First V-twin in 1907, dominant in early racing circuits. These weren't just machines, they were rolling icons of rebellion, craftsmanship, and the open-road dream that defined post-war America. But while American brands rested on their laurels, a storm was building. Rising fuel costs, economic pressure, a global hunger for reliable, affordable transport. And it was coming from the east. The Japanese invasion. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki. These weren't invaders, and they were revolutionaries. Starting with Honda's Super Cub in 1958, which sold millions worldwide on sheer simplicity and bulletproof reliability. The Japanese brands didn't just enter the American market, they dismantled it. Picture this. While Harley's lumbered with pushrod engines maxing at around 6,000 revolutions per minute, Honda's CB75 arrived in American showrooms in January 1969 at $1,495. At a time when comparable big bikes in the US were selling for $2,800 to $4,000, that price point was a gut punch, and the technology backed it up. Inline 4 engine, double overhead cams screaming to 9,000 revolutions per minute, a lighter frame, disc brakes that stopped on a dime even in the rain. Kawasaki's Z1 followed in 1972. 903 cubic centimeters, 82 horsepower, a top speed over 130 miles per hour, and the nickname King of the Road. Yamaha's RD350 terrorized streets with agile handling. Suzuki's GT750 Water Buffalo brought liquid cooling to the masses. Compared to Harley's, these bikes barely needed maintenance, and they cost half as much. By the early 1980s, Japanese manufacturers controlled the overwhelming majority of U.S. motorcycle sales. Harley's grip on the heavyweight market, once virtually total, had collapsed to under 15%. That wasn't a drop, that was near annihilation. The quality crisis. The invasion wasn't the only killer. The crisis ran deeper, right to the heart of American manufacturing. In 1969, American Machine and Foundry, AMF, acquired Harley-Davidson, seeing dollar signs in mass production. They ramped output from around 15,000 bikes a year to over 30,000 by the mid-1970s. But at what cost? Quality nosedived, oil leaks became legendary, riders joked about marking their territory like dogs, poor welds led to frames cracking under stress, weak electrical systems failed at random, vibration shook riders to the bone. The nickname Harley-Abelson stuck. Meanwhile, Japanese bikes just worked, every time. And compared to Harley's, they barely needed maintenance. AMF's relentless focus on volume had nearly buried the brand. But here's what made it feel personal. These bikes weren't just transport. They were extensions of identity. Watching them fail felt like watching the American dream sputter out. The $81.5 million gamble. Enter 1981. 13 Harley executives, led by Von Beals and the legendary Willie G. Davidson, grandson of co-founder William A. Davidson, saw the writing on the wall. With the company hemorrhaging cash and bankruptcy looming in just 18 months, they orchestrated one of the boldest moves in manufacturing history, an $81.5 million leveraged buyout from AMF, financed by a consortium of banks led by Citibank. This went beyond business. If the company died here, an entire piece of American motorcycle culture disappeared with it. They mortgaged homes, cashed in savings, rallied employees. Willie G later said it felt like rescuing a family member from the brink. The debts were real, the pressure was immense, and every decision carried the weight of 80 years of legacy. The tariff victory. They needed breathing room, and they got it through sheer grit in Washington, D.C. In International Trade Commission hearings, Harley executives hauled disassembled Japanese bikes into the room and tore them apart. They argued Japanese firms were selling motorcycles in the U.S. at unsustainably low prices, using profits at home to undercut American competitors abroad. The evidence was hard to dismiss. In April 1983, President Reagan signed the order, tariffs skyrocketing from 4.4% to 49.4% on bikes over 700 cubic centimeters. Import volume slowed. Harley had 5 precious years to rebuild, but the Japanese responded fast. Kawasaki slightly reduced the bore on their 738 cubic centimeter engine, dropping it to 694 cubic centimeters, the new KZ700, dodging the tariff with near identical power. Yamaha and Suzuki followed. Trade policy had become an engineering chess match. And here's the part most people miss. Most analysts agree the tariffs alone didn't save Harley. The breathing room they bought mattered, but the real turnaround came from what Harley's own people did next. The quality revolution. With time secured, Harley's leaders did something counterintuitive. They studied the very Japanese methods that had nearly killed them. Just-in-time manufacturing. Workers on the floor empowered to spot defects before they ship. Defects dropped 70% in the first years. But the deeper change was cultural. Unable to match Japanese volume, Harley doubled down on what no competitor could replicate. Emotion. That thunderous rumble. The weight and feel of a bike built to mean something. One veteran assembler put it simply, "We weren't building bikes anymore. We were building legends again." Reliability soared, customers came back, and the loyalty that followed was the kind money couldn't manufacture. The marketing revolution. The real breakthrough came when Harley realized something fundamental. They weren't selling motorcycles. They were selling a feeling, freedom, belonging, a version of America you could ride. Harley pioneered lifestyle branding long before Apple dreamed of it. In 1983, they launched the Harley Owners Group, HOG, which grew to over 1 million members worldwide, built on rallies, group rides, and bonds that went far deeper than any loyalty program. T-shirts, leather jackets, cologne, whiskey. At some point, Harley stopped feeling like a motorcycle company and started feeling like a culture. Partnerships amplified it. The 1999 Ford F-150 Harley Davidson edition blended truck toughness with Moto swagger and sold out almost immediately. Easy Rider in 1969 had already cemented the rebel image. Now Harley owned it completely. Riders weren't customers, they were family. Veterans finding solace in group rides. Families passing bikes down generations. This wasn't marketing, it was mythology in motion. The Victory Declaration. By 1987, the impossible happened. Harley asked Reagan to lift the tariffs 2 years early. Von Beals walked into Washington and declared, "We're profitable again, we're recapitalized, we're diversified, we don't need any more help." This was historic. The first time in U.S. history, an American company voluntarily surrendered trade protection. They had proven they could compete again, on quality, loyalty, and brand. For the first time in decades, the American roar echoed again. Earned, not inherited. Indians' Phoenix moment. But while Harley was reclaiming the throne, the other giant of American motorcycle history, Indian, remained a ghost. A name passed through failed holding companies for decades after its 1953 collapse, with nothing to show for it but nostalgia and lawsuits, until 2011. Polaris acquired the brand for an undisclosed sum in April 2011, injecting modern muscle into a century of heritage. They didn't ape Harley, they carved their own path. The Thunderstroke 111 engine, a 1,811 cubic centimeters V-twin delivering up to 119 foot-pounds of torque. Blended retro styling with cutting-edge technology, like keyless ignition. Then came the 2015 Indian Scout, unveiled at Sturgis in August 2014. A 1,133 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin, 100 horsepower, aimed at younger riders who want a performance without the weight. Sales surged sharply after launch. Racing dominance followed. Indian swept the American Flat Track Series and helped birth King of the Baggers, a race series where full-dress touring bikes hit tracks at over 150 miles per hour. Indian wasn't just back, it was challenging Harley for the premium segment crown. Buell's return. And riding alongside that resurgence is one of the most anticipated returns in motorcycle history. Buell Motorcycle, founded in 1983 by ex-Harley engineer Eric Buell, is building bikes again. The Super Cruiser is unlike anything you've seen from a US brand. 175 horsepower from a 1,190 cubic centimeter, liquid-cooled V-twin, ride-by-wire throttle, cornering ABS, starting at $25,900. The first production Super Cruiser, VIN 0001, rolled off the line on September 26, 2025. The pre-order book held over $120 million in reservations before a single customer took delivery. Buell's history runs through some of the most innovative bikes ever built in America, from the early RS-1200 and RSS-1200 of the late 1980s and early 1990s, with their signature under-engine muffler design, through multiple revivals and near-deaths. Now the bikes are shipping, the comeback is real. But American motorcycles weren't just coming back mechanically. They were about to change completely. Electric evolution. Harley launched its Livewire electric motorcycle in 2019, then spun it off as a completely separate brand, Livewire Group, in 2021, going public the following year. The Livewire 1 delivers 84 foot-pounds of instant torque, hits 0 to 60 in 3 seconds flat, and receives over-the-air software updates that evolve the bike without a dealer visit. Full year 2025, 653 units sold globally. A small number, but the hardware is serious and they fired the first shot in America's electric motorcycle war. Meanwhile, California-based Zero Motorcycles leads the charge. The SR/F puts down 140 foot-pounds of torque, hits 60 inches under 3.5 seconds, and with the 17.3 kilowatt-hour battery delivers up to 187 miles of city range. And at the extreme end, Lightning Motorcycles LS218 claims a manufacturer-asserted 218 miles per hour top speed, electric of course. The experience is completely different from anything that came before. Instant torque with no warm-up, no clutch, no vibration. Software updates arriving overnight that change how the bike behaves. For younger riders especially, that kind of seamless tech integration matters. American brands aren't chasing this revolution, they're shaping it. Market reality check. No glory without grit. By the end of 2025, MIC data showed U.S. motorcycle and scooter sales down 7.6% from 2024, 486,468 new units, the weakest year in a decade. Touring motorcycle sales fell 13%. Dealer lots were jammed with aging inventory. Hundreds of thousands of bikes sitting on showroom floors, forcing deep discounting across every segment. And yet, in premium heavyweight cruiser and touring, Harley commands over 50% market share, often reaching 70% in core sub-segments, higher than at any point in the 1970s. Honda's Grom is one of the top-selling motorcycles by unit volume in the US, but Harley remains the undisputed revenue king in the heavyweight segment. The doom narrative is overstated. The 2025 challenges. The challenges are real. Motorcycle loan rates hit 7 to 10% for prime borrowers in 2025. New motorcycle prices are up over 40% since 2020. Add insurance, gear, and licensing for a first-time buyer under 25, and first-year ownership costs often climb 30 to 40% beyond the sticker price. Tariff uncertainty on imported components added further pressure throughout the supply chain. Harley paused production lines, Indian adjusted allocations, but the grassroots endured. Small brands like Janus Motorcycles continued to thrive, with handcrafted singles starting around $6,995, often selling out limited runs while the majors were cutting prices. When the mainstream struggles, American moto spirit finds another way. Cultural impact. This comeback isn't just business. Easy Rider in 1969 symbolized counterculture freedom on a Harley, Indian-powered Steve McQueen on screen. Today, bikes appear in Sons of Anarchy and music from Bruce Springsteen to modern artists across every genre. The emotional core is community. Sturgis draws around 500,000 riders annually, generating an estimated $800 million in economic impact for South Dakota, veterans finding brotherhood in HOG chapters, families bonding over Indian restorations in the garage, a cancer survivor riding coast to coast for charity. American motorcycles export this ethos worldwide. Hog chapters now operate from Europe to Asia. That's not a product. That's mythology in motion. Future horizon. The global motorcycle market is projected to grow from around $121 billion in 2025 to roughly $178 billion by 2035. In the US, the market is forecast to climb from about $9.85 billion in 2024 to around $14.6 billion by 2033, roughly 4.5% annual growth. In electric two-wheelers, US revenue is expected to grow at around 11 to 12% a year through the end of the decade. Harley and Indian are pouring R&D into rumored hybrids that blend V-twin character with electric torque by the late 2020s. But the industry has a harder problem than technology. The median age of a US motorcycle owner has crossed 50, up from just 32 in 1990. The riders who built Harley's loyal base are aging, and the pipeline of younger buyers isn't replacing them fast enough. Charging infrastructure is expanding. Battery weight is dropping. The emotional gap between a silent electric motor and the identity of motorcycling is real. But it's narrowing fast. The brands that crack younger rider acquisition will define American motorcycling for the next generation. That's the real battle, not Japanese competition. Demographics. After everything, AMF's disaster, Japanese domination, bankruptcy, trade wars, failed revivals, industry collapse, these bikes are still here. Still loud, still emotional, still impossible to ignore. Harley rebuilt itself from the inside out. Indian came back from the dead. Buell is shipping production bikes. Livewire fired the first electric shot. None of it was clean. None of it was easy. All of it was earned. So tell me, what represents American motorcycle culture in 2026? Harley's hard-won heritage, Indian's racing pedigree, Buell's raw engineering ambition, or the electric revolution rewriting the rules? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit differently than you expected, subscribe, because the next chapter is already being written.